I'm Brandon Miller, and you are listening to Coach. This weekly series dives deep into the world of Clifton strengths and how they impact your daily life. Hear from certified strengths coaches on the ins and outs, quirks, and characteristics of all 34 strengths and 4 domains and how they play out in real life. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the Strengths Whisperer Season 2, Coach to Coach. I have with me today Bill Dippel. He is our guest coming from Reno, Nevada, and we are talking about the relationship builder domain. Bill, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, Brandon. Great to be here. Season 2.
Season 2.
I'm liking it. How far into Season 2 are we right now?
We are just about we just released episode 9 of 38. So we are progressing. You are my second domain recording. So we've done a whole series of individual strengths. We did influencing domain. Today we're doing relationship building, and I'm eager for this one because of all of the domains. This is the one that is most foreign to my particular strengths. I have none of 10 in this domain, and you have 6 of 10 in this domain. And early on, when I was getting trained in strengths, they had this training around blind spots and knowing where your blind spots were in your areas of strength. So this is a domain that I've often said, okay, someone's got to guide me into this one because I won't feel my way into it. I won't think my way. I can understand it, but I need someone like you to help bring some expertise today. So I hope you came ready, Bill.
All right. We've known each other a while, so I'm ready. I'm going to try. We'll see.
All right.
I wear my heart on my sleeve, so be careful with me.
Yeah. Okay. We will tread lightly. Everyone, BillDippel.com, Dippel, if you're taking the note. If you're watching us on video, look above his head, BillDippel.com. And his company works with groups 50 to 200, but they can go down or they can go up. They are working in nonprofits, logistics, happens to have recently signed on a private school. I know Bill has a career in government, and he'll tell us a little more. But Bill, of all of the areas you could have focused your business, you chose strengths. Can you tell us why you went down that path?
Oh, yeah, it's a great story. I'll shorten it up for time here, Brandon. But essentially, I was working for the state government, stateside entity. I was working with higher education, and I had done pretty well in that realm. I was a assistant CIO, VP, and working for a university entity. And I actually got invited to a doTERRA conference. My wife was part of a doTERRA component where they were selling oils and doing other stuff. And she said, "You want to come to this?" And I said, "Yeah, that'd be great." And I sat through 2 days of the biggest conference I've ever seen in my life at the Salt Palace in Utah. And just so many people. And it was all fine for me. But at one point, a Gallup representative got up and was talking about how to use Gallup and how to look at strengths with your sales teams and and I was a scientist for the state. I was with the nonprofit arm that does a lot of air quality, water quality, soils quality. So I had a science background, and listening to him talk about strengths and all of the science behind it just made so much sense to me. It just super resonated with me. And I thought, wow, I want to try that. So I went home and I took the assessment. And then started researching on it, started managing the people that I had under me at the university campus using strengths in kind of a general way. And that was great for several years. And then I left. I retired from the state, got out. I'm a PERS guy, so, get out when you can. And I got picked up by another company, about 60 people strong, that all virtual, completely virtual. And they wanted me to step in and fulfill this role. And one of the things they asked me to do was take this Gallup strengths test. And I said, I don't have to take that. Here, I'll send it to you. Save the money. Here it is. And their vice president said, "Well, you know this." I said, "Yeah, I managed with it. Loved it." And they go, "Well, would you facilitate for all 60 of us?" And I said, "I'd love to. But to be totally honest, I'm not certified, right? I manage with it, studied it, but I don't know it. I'm not certified." And this nonprofit was insanely profitable. And they said, "You're certified now." So they sent me off and I got my accelerated strengths coaching, started rolling through that. Gosh, just loved every day I got up and coached some of those 60 people. And then my other job was very hands-on and very, it was a director of supply chain and logistics. And that's fine. It's a great job, but for a relationship guy, finding lost items in logistics just wasn't huge for me. So I realized every day I loved doing the other part. So I said, heck it, let's go. My wife and I made the decision to hang it up on our own and go out and coach for us. And so that's how I stepped into it. It was a subtle, fun thing with my wife. And then it was, hey, I can manage with this. And then it was, wow, we take this really seriously. And now we're going to pay for you to go get certified. And then, I just found it was what I love doing, right? We're talking to people, Brandon, with that relationship domain just lit me up.
What a great story. So BillDippel.com, your company, how long in business now?
So I've been in business about 4.5, 5 years, I'd say, so started managing with strengths like 7, 8 years ago. And then, went into being a internal coach, embedded coach for a group for 2 years. And so I'd say about maybe 4.5 years just on my own.
Well, Bill, thank you for joining us today and taking us down the path of the relationship building domain. And so I count six of eight or six of nine of your strengths are in the relationship building domain: individualization, developer, empathy, harmony, connectedness, relator. So some might say when you load that many up, 60% of the top 10, you're probably leading with relationship building as a domain. Would that be accurate for you?
I'd say that's absolutely accurate, right? It never is far from almost anything I do. So,
and I think if we round that out, so there's adaptability. We should mention includer, and of course, we can mention positivity to add on. And so, Bill, when you think of the domains in general, so on this season, we've been talking a lot about individual strengths. As I mentioned, there's one domain coming out ahead of this one. But when you think of how those are organized, what are ways that you help to describe that to people when you think of the domains in general?
Yeah, one of the great ways we talk about domains so much in our coaching, and especially with our management groups, right? Because the domains are really that light bulb ideas around, hey, let's give some generalization around the 34 themes that we all know really well as coaches. So how do we highlight in a general term how you might approach a specific management or a relationship, whether it be somebody at work or your private relationship, right? How can you step into and understand in a more general way? If you got 5 minutes before you're walking in and you're about to get somebody with nothing but strategy, right? So are you walking in and if I just can give you 5 minutes to think about it and see it, are you going to walk in and say, gosh, how was your weekend? Did you do Did you do that? Or are you going to say, hey, here's our problem and here's the numbers and ideas behind it. And here's where we go, right? You want to fuel maybe that strategy lead a little bit. If you walk in and you're asking all those relationship questions and you're getting glassy eyed, you might start to understand that or feel why that's happening. So, and then the activators, right? If you're slowing them down and the high achievers and, if we're not hitting on those and it's just that generalized way to deal with it, right? And, one of the ways I mentioned relationship building for years to groups that I work with when I was doing some larger speeches and group sides was I would point out my number one, which is individualization, right? And it's a pure relationship domain. And I used individualization for decades as a blind spot, as a negative. I was really good at being bad at it. And what that means, the way that played out is I'm really good in individualization of seeing how everyone's different, right? I don't see green aprons when I walk into a Starbucks. I see Kevin and Becky and Nancy and right. And I know who I kind of want to deal with and, I want to laugh with and how we do that. I spent a lot of my younger life using that high-powered individualization to find the problems with people or what I perceived as their problems, right? How can they, oh gosh, you're annoying in that way, right? Or you're blah, or your X or your Y. And, oh, I don't need to deal with that. And, the reality is, Brandon, I probably threw away, 100 fantastic relationships because I kind of pushed them away. And thank God, some of the great friends of mine, by the way, strangely enough, the influencing friends of mine, uh, they climbed over that fence. They took that challenge and they're like, no, we're not done. We're going to be friends, right? We're doing this. And then eventually my relationship is like, oh, yes, you are, no matter, despite that thing, you're fantastic, right? Let's maintain that, right? And it took me going through strengths to really understand that relationship, the dichotomy of how I would see things and how it might get in my way. And individualization was a big part of that. And one way we talk about often as coaches that I get around that is I have to turn on my number two, which is developer, right? So I look at individualization and I'm thinking, but how can I help me be better at understanding that? Or maybe how can I help them see that, right? Because there are times I'll run into people and say, I just want to give you a really clear view of how that's coming across. Can I develop our relationship in a way that's better for both of us? And that locks down my individualization a bit. As my wife would say, it puts it in the back seat, and now my developer drives. So probably fair to mention, my wife is a Gallup certified strengths coach as well. And one of the things we do is we coach together almost exclusively for our groups. And the reason we do that is, as I mentioned, she's a pure strategist. So she will hit a certain idea or philosophy, and she'll hit it from a strategy point of view. And you can see half the room is like, that's fantastic. Oh, I really get that. And then I talk and they're like, okay, maybe, right? And then as I'm doing it, the other half of the room is like, oh, that makes total sense, right? And so if we can bring that dynamicness to it, because another key component in each of the themes, but I think also particularly in the domains, is how we communicate. I'll ask groups after Renee and I have worked together for a while, do you see the differences in how we communicate? And I don't think anyone's ever gone, no, you seem like the same person, right? Because my wife is strategizing it. How can I help? How will it hit? How will it go? How will it go? And I'm thinking, how can we be better, right? I'm on the people side. So that's a breakdown on that part.
Yeah, when I think about this domain, because I've worked with many leaders who are high relationship building, worked with many teams that lead with relationship building, and you think about what does this team need or what does this leader need to be effective, and often it's going to come back to a place where there's genuine connection and inclusion. So it's we take time and effort to make sure that we're looking for authenticity. We're looking for a place that we can connect. And then with that becomes an environment where there's not judgment. This domain does not do well that I've noticed there. And so in our company, we refer to this kindly as the glue stick domain. That of all the domains that you don't want to have missing on your team, it's this one. Because you go from a collection of amazing stars, right? Or amazing strategists or people that are just fantastic at getting things done and executing, but you're missing that critical component of making a group of individuals into a true us, into a true team, the essence of we can now do more together, go further and farther as a unit than we can individually. And I'm curious for you, as you've coached to this in an individual with this domain or teams, orgs, what have you noticed in how you see this domain?
Yeah, you've hit it dead on, right? I'd never tell a group, hey, you've only got 4% of relationship building on this. We need to go hire a bunch of relationship people, right? Not a hiring tool. But I would tell you that when you're dealing with individualization, or let's say small teams groups, working with a management group or a C-suite group, and man, they've really just got that relationship high, right? And they're pushing it out there. That's where we lean into that ability, right? You are the glue. You are the person that's going to make that happen. I have 4 coaches on staff, and we move around. And I met this morning with one of our coaches and the person that kind of keeps me straight. And she's a pure strategist like my wife, very, very good at it. But she is amazingly smart at dealing with both of us. Our this morning started with, talking about how we're doing and where we're at, and we get those feelings and emotions going. Kind of the same process when I'm dealing with an individual or a C-suite group that have that high. Let's talk about the emotion. Let's talk about, hey, how are you feeling about this project, right? So, Brandon, you and I attended an event recently, right? And we got a book, and I've been reading the book, which it's Listen, right? How to Listen. And there's a story in it that I actually stole and used with a C-suite here a little while ago about putting words in an envelope and letting the people dictate how you manage style, what your management style is, was what I used, or how you feel the president, who wasn't in the room, manages, right? And there was a lot of words that went in the anonymous envelope that when I brought them out and read them for everybody anonymously, there was a lot of words there that I'm sure the president would not have been overjoyed with. And there's all that emotion behind that, right? I feel lack of trust. I don't know that I have any procedure or any way to move forward to go ahead in this job because my manager doesn't believe in what I do, right? There was some of that. And when people can hear that and be open about it, that C-suite level, right? It also opens them up to being able to hear it from their employees and the people that they're dealing with. So I mentioned the hard place of where some of those relationship themes got hard for me, knowing individualization, or when I married my strategist wife and I was like, why are you doing it? We can hang out and talk for a couple minutes. And she's like, no, we have places to go, things to do. And when we would butt heads about it, it could get a hard spot, take us to a really difficult place. But then when we both assessed and became coaches and we could talk through it, I realized why she wants that. I realize why she wants that relation or wants me to have the relationship, but she really wants that strengths component to be more strategic. And now we lean into that for each other, right? We push each other to do it. And that's when you ask, how would we help an individual or a person with all of that relationship? Lean into it and surround yourself, right, with the strategist and the influencer and the executor, and know what they bring to the table. That's, I think, the true beauty of the domain is we can see that pretty quickly, right? They've made it such a simple color scheme that we can look at a DNA helix or a page 22 on a set of boxes and know exactly kind of where to lead into that. And I think that's the strength of working with a manager, middle manager, or even just a group of good employees that need to work together to get some sort of project done, right? If we can get them to align on, man, I'm the executor. Let me keep going. Let me push, right? And I know there's some generalization there, but getting them to understand it and see it, very powerful.
I've noted with teams that are high in relationship building that you were describing earlier about the time it takes to facilitate connection, relationship, and provide room for depth, provide room for transparency, provide room for true exchange. And I found that when at times leaders who may not share that same domain don't give space for that, it can actually create a level of disruption for that team because
so much.
because that same connection power can actually move over into a place of unhealth. And when a relationship building high team becomes toxic, what can happen is that there can be suspicion and gossip and a lack of safety. So if they don't feel safe, they don't feel connected. And so as you work with leaders, and you note this domain and you note how it shows up within a team, I'm curious just ways that you're coaching on how to get the most from this. How do we take this domain and really help it to be a strong contributor to the overall support of a team or an organization?
Yeah, well, so you're an influencer, right? Your influencing themes are very, very high. And for you and I, this would be a very symbolic coachable moment, right? So number 2 for me is influencing. So I lead with relationship and then down to influencing. But if you tried to find my strategy line on page 22, it would require a microscope, right? It's pretty small. And my executing is so, but my strategy is just real small. However, one of the coaching methodologies that I like to use when looking at this, so if you and I were C-suiting together in a company, how do we see each other and how do we see each other use that particular domain? So for instance, Brandon, I like my influencing, right? I have woo really high. I have activator really high. But another way that I see this getting in the way of C-suiters and other people is sometimes you don't trust the other influencers, right? Sometimes just because you're in the same domain or really working in that same domain, you tend to think, well, I know that really well, and I do it better than you do, or I feel that you're making a misstep by using it in that way. So my activator might get stepped on because your activator took it and ran with it and said, let's go. Right. And I'm like, wait a minute. Or my woo, also got stepped on because we all went to a Giants game, right? I see your Giants banner. So we all went to a Giants game and then Bill wasn't invited. So now my relationship's getting hurt, but my woo is too, because I can't talk, right? And there was something else about it, but I would attribute it to, management wants Brandon to do more stuff in that C-suite category. And so I can look at things a little harshly, and I have to bring that to my coaching because we're all human beings that have those feelings. And I can't assume, gosh, look at all of that influencing. I have to really step back and narrow down because I want to look at, again, we're human. I want to look at influencing and make some assumptions about it and think, charge into a room, ready to handle it, good at doing this, ready for this. And I want to think, gosh, I am just a bundle of messy nerves sometimes in the relationship side, right? It's more gooey and that. And in reality, you and I work with a lot of groups that have some pretty important people in them. And in dealing with those people, inevitably, what I am constantly amazed by is how wrong I am. I see all this influencing. I see it, right? And then they are genuinely engaging all the way to it feels like they are building relationships. So what they've done is they have molded their influencing to be as good as the relationship domain at stepping in and doing what they do. You can still spot it. You can still see it's from an influencing place, but it's fascinating to allow them to come to that and then point that out to them. So if you and I are in that same room, it's, hey, I'm number 2 at influencer. How does activator work for you? How does that work, right? How do you feel like woo works for you? Because I want to make sure our woo isn't stepping on each other, right? That's an easier thing to bounce off each other when we are in different domains, right? So now I'm in the relationship. You need someone to build the relationship rather than influence it. Cut me loose, right? Let me do it. Let me handle it. And if I need someone to move the needle outside of woo, right? I might be Brandon. Can you knock on this door for me and move that for me? Because I'm really having a hard time with that. My relationship isn't getting through.
That's good. When I think about this domain, and I'm going to move this to the individual side. So listeners, BillDippel.com. We're talking about the relationship building domain today. His company, groups of 50 to 200 and more or less, comes to us with a CIO scientist background. And if you're hearing him as the relationship building scientist, that's right. That was not a mistake. He's actually a scientist high in relationship building who married the strategic thinker. That's a fun connection you have.
Yeah,
there, Bill.
I will tell you that from the CIO side, one thing we don't generally attribute to the IT sciences is a relationship guy, right?
I was going to say, you mean they're not all androids? So
you're giving right. So they're general. And I really thought when I started coaching, my bread and butter would be in IT departments because nobody needs generally more ideas around how to become more humane or empathetic, than generally IT departments. But I point out the reason I was successful as a CIO wasn't because I was technically good. I mean, I was technically fine from a networking and some of the big stuff we did. I was really good, but I wasn't the best. And I certainly wasn't the best I had in my corral. I would hire the best. The beauty was I could build that relationship with those people. I could build it and make sure that they were really happy at where they were and what they were doing. And the other part of that was I was really good at humanizing the problem to up the chain and down the chain. I could talk to my bosses and say, the reason this is failing is not because the token ring network failed at this junk, but they don't want to know that, right? It's this is why, and this is the problem it's going to cause, and down the chain too, to make sure they were bought into it. So it was using relationship skills that made me a better CIO than strategizing and being a good technical guy.
Thinking about the individual with high relationship building, and I appreciate that you brought some compare and contrast to, I like to say, the cousins. So you have the influencing cousins next to the relationship building cousins, and then we could say executing and strategic. They have a little more parity, let's say. But when you think about influence, because they're going to speak up, take charge, make sure the team is heard, they're out in front more. Relationship builders tend to not be as pronounced. They tend to not be as public. Now, obviously, there's a whole mix here. You happen to have high relationship building with woo, so maybe that rule doesn't hold exactly. But in general, I happen to work with several on the team at 34 Strong. We lead with relationship building as a domain. And what we've learned is that sometimes this domain has to be invited into the space, invited to share, invited to provide perspective, because they might not naturally want to feel the need to, or in some way, feel compelled to speak in. And I'm curious, in your experience being a relationship builder, just that invitation to come on, what are you hearing? What are you seeing? Because the information is often vital, right? It's how are we connecting? I have a description here that those in this domain provide the essential glue that hold teams together. Without these strengths on a team, in many cases, the group is simply a composite of individuals. You get all the individuals, but you don't get the us awesomeness, I call it. You don't get that amazing us. And you and I, before the recording today, were talking a little about sports. And I used to ask groups this quite often. I would say, how many of you ever noted that the most talented team doesn't always win the championship? You can have the collection of the best athletes and they don't do particularly well because they're a bunch of individuals and they don't learn. And until somebody breaks down, somebody allows there to be some glue associated with the team, you're gonna suffer that individual. You get what the individual can get, but you could be beat by less talented folks who play as one, because their synergy is going to trump your individual talent. So curious for you, you actually have this as a lead domain. You clearly worked with many teams with it. What have you noticed here? What can you offer us in that respect?
The theme that comes to mind when you brought that up is number 7 for me, and that's harmony, right? How do we harmony people? When I'm talking about this to a large group, I'll often point out, if you put me in a room with 8 people and there's an argument going on, I'm going to do one of 2 things. I'm going to shut the argument down and get us all rowing in the same direction, or I'm going to leave, right? Because for me, if the argument is above the line of where I think we're being productive, then I'm out, right? I just can't, I don't have a good way to function that. But as you know, that makes harmony people really valuable in those meetings where we don't get to that big line, but really good at, hey, we kind of have some missteps here and some side steps. How do we get someone here that can help us do that, right? In a very positive, let's say, attic usage of harmony is being able to push that and rail that. The mature usage of it allows me to really push forward and see that happen. And so that feels good to me. Do I need to be invited in is a great question, right? You and I are different in that way. We've talked about this before when we've seen each other socially outside, and how your influencing and my relationship kind of look a little different. And it depends on the setting, even for me. And yeah, I have high woo, right? And I have high activator. So I want to jump and go. And, and my woo is always, I tell people that woo, in Gallup's world stands for winning others over, but in my world, it stands for wife objects often. And that is because I'm gonna be in a social group talking to people, and she's gonna be like, "Let's go." And I'm making my wife sound like she doesn't talk socially. That's not true. My wife.
I met Renee, and
Yeah,
she's a lovely person. Very social, yes.
Renee will be very honest and tell you my goal is to have 3 meaningful conversations. Is an outlandish goal. 2 would be reasonable, and 1 is really what I'm aiming at. And for me, I just want to know everyone in the room, right? And I want to know where they're at and where we're going. So I don't have to be invited in so much. It really depends on the mood of the room. But I will tell you, and relating directly back to domains, if there's a lot of relationship gooeyness in the room, I absolutely don't have to be invited in, right? We're ping ponging off of each other. But if you put me in a room with a bunch of IT professionals that are pure strategists and executors, let's say, and let's just make that assumption for what that assumption is, I'm going to step into it lightly, right? Because I know this bigness, right, will a lot of people will be like, whoa, I don't need to deal with that. And if my goal is to make sure we're all rowing in the same direction, I've just turned off a lot of them. So how do I step into that? And that again is, I think, relational to the coaching moment you're asking about, which is, how do we work with coaches that really, or I'm sorry, with CEO and the big C-suiters? How do you lean in with that particular domain and not do that, right? The influencing. We work with several influencing, very top of the C-suites, and some of them are just amazing at it, and they're so good at keeping you influenced and engaged, and you really feel valued when you're around them. And some of them aren't, right? It's that fine line of influencing where, it kind of goes on the rail. I might ask you if you notice that periodically, where some people, they bond to it, right? And they really like where you're at. And you and I took some time to get to know each other and understand, right? And that, I think it was that line of, oh, what are you influencing for here? Oh, wait, you're just trying to be a good guy that wants to make sure we're all getting better at what we do. And so it took that for me. So in that way, I had to be invited in, right? I had to kind of know it. From the coaching point of view, I think getting people to understand that they have to be invited in and why allows them to be able to, oh, you know what, maybe I need to activate something else, right? I need to think of this in a different way, or really make sure that I'm speaking up when I need to speak up. Because one thing we notice a lot about the relationship domains for those big managers are, if they aren't speaking up, people aren't finding value in what they bring to the table. And eventually they're looked at as, well, maybe not too much of a big thinker, not an action person. When in reality, that's not true. On the backside, they have relationship to make sure everybody's rowing and going and doing right. And they're the glue that's making it happen. So just allowing them to know what it looks like from other people's eyes and themselves, very powerful for not only themes, but domains in a big, big way.
That's right. Good. Thank you, Bill. I want to mention this about the relationship building domain in particular, and we'll part on this point. I have found that this one, and all 4 are true, all strengths have this in common, but this one in particular, trust, is so important to performance. Meaning, if I am in a space of high trust, then all of this power associated with relator and harmony, developer, connectedness, it all comes through in a bright and shining way. But if trust isn't present in a tangible way, it seems that this particular domain, it'll shadow it. It'll withdraw it. Not that others won't as well, but this one in particular, in my experience, seems to really need that as a premium. I'm curious if you could speak to that in terms of how this particular domain functions.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a supervisor, a boss above me, that was a pure influencer. And she was unbelievable, amazing at what she did for a living, and the kind of person you will always want on your team. Very, very focused, but go, very self-assured about where she was moving, what was happening. The problem was, and it's not solely her problem, it's an our problem, is I didn't trust her. And I don't trust her because there was long periods of time where, as my boss, she never talked to me. Now, for an influencer, that very well could mean, and almost surely in some way means, you're doing great, right? Don't worry about it. You're fine. But in reality, for a relationship guy, if I'm not getting, and I'm not saying I need to get patted hard on the back all the time, but I need influx that tells me, hey, this project's going here. Here's what I'm working on. Here's where we're going. Love that you did that. Oh, you know what? That you might have missed on. We could have done this a little better. That's all fine. But as long as we're having a relationship, even if it's a neutral one that makes sure we're pointing in that direction, that's critical for the relationship domain people that right? Even if they shy away from it a little bit, there has to be some relationship stickiness to it. And yeah, that ended up being a job I walked away from. So, and it was a great job, fantastic company, wonderful to work with. It just was tough because I just felt I can't trust that we're going in the same direction because we don't communicate about it.
It's fascinating you say that still to this day, the number one reason why people leave their job is an issue with their boss. And often when you talk to them, you're going to hear, I don't trust them. I don't trust them. I don't think they have my best interest in mind. I don't think they understand. And for those of you listening today who maybe are high executing or strategic thinking or influencing, or you're coaching someone in this domain, time and testing. So trust must have an element of time to establish it, time to test it out. Is this genuine? Is it authentic? Is it real? Is this person's intention for the greater good, for my good? Or are they really just out for themselves? And what I have learned, and this is now we got to get to the part of this that is the extra power you relationship builders have. And if you are friends with, in relationship with, work for a relationship builder, you should know this today, that they read you like a book, whether you want them to or not. They are reading you like a book. They pick up on your nuanced speech, behavior, patterns, and they pick up everything. And they'll tell you about conversations you had with them years back, months back, weeks back in shocking detail. In shocking detail.
And it won't just be the conversation. They will also tell you their feeling, right? Hey, by the way, Brandon, that I felt so genuinely enamored with something you said at that, right? It isn't always for us. It isn't just the words, but it's also, and I have a best friend that texts me every day, right? It's way too much. I'm not saying relationship builders need something all the time, right? My best friend will text me in the morning and he's like, good morning. And I'm like, oh God, we're going to talk later. It's fine, right? Just let it go. I know the power and energy it takes to keep those relationships going. And there's a lot.
And if you're listening, best friend, he thinks you're amazing.
Trust me, he knows he's a good guy. I promise. But I know the energy it takes. So I'm not saying it has to happen all the time, but there has to be something there. If he fell off the earth and stopped texting me, right, I'd be like, okay, something has. Yeah, that's
you go find him.
I would in a heartbeat. And when you and I talk, or and other coaches and some other people we know, and if we're just having that check-in and making sure it works, right, that's good for a good relationship person. We gotta have it. So
I'm going to add this last piece because it's such an important part of the power of you leaders who lead with relationship building. Trust your instincts. Bill, I've asked this so many times to relationship building leaders, that the time where you had a sense something was off and you didn't obey the sense, you paid for it later. You paid for it later. And then you've learned to trust your instincts, that you really are. Sometimes perhaps some judgments in there, some past life lessons, life trauma, things get in there. But in general, you're good at sourcing authenticity, truthfulness and trust, and how important that is to, the success of any endeavor.
Yeah. I asked that boss of mine a while back to look at if you wanted to know me, if you want to know who I am as an employee, listen to season 5 of the Gallup podcast for developer, season 5 developer theme. If you want to know who I am, that's, I think I was driving home from Utah and crying when it was on and they were going over it. Right. And so having that ability and that a way to build on that, right. You're right. We read people so well. I've had so many clients tell me I didn't even know that. or how spooky is it that you just told me that, right? And I want to make the clarity between you and I here a bit, and that is, I will sense it all, but I might be slower putting my foot in, right? My toe might not jump right in, particularly if, as I said, we're in a room with a bunch of different domains, and I don't want to splash heavy, right? I don't want to spook everyone so fast by saying what I see and how I'm doing it. Whereas the influencing people I coach so much, they may just jump right into it, but they don't sense it as deeply or as I guess as washingly as the relationship people do, right? So getting them to balance that and see it, right? And less of a bull in a china closet on the orange side, right? And more of a, hey, put your foot in because you're feeling it. And if you don't, this moment is going to get past you, right? So take a few more risks when you step into that. Yeah, to reflect on both of those. That's all really good advice.
Listeners, thank you so much for coming and joining us today as we talk about the relationship building domain, Coach to Coach, Strengths Whisperer Season 2. If you are interested in receiving a resource from 34 Strong, you can message Brandon at 34strong.com. We have a resource for you that will outline all 34 strengths, their contributions, their needs, put something in your hands that can help you along your way on your journey, either as a practitioner or an applicant or someone who's coaching and leading with this inside of your organization or your individual effort. Bill, thank you again for joining us. BillDippel.com. Anywhere else, Bill, that people can find you or know what you're up to?
I'm easy. LinkedIn has me as Coach Bill Dippel. Facebook has me as Bill Dippel Strengths Coaching. These are all, all the stuff on my wall behind me are things we take to events to get people to, open up and laugh and print on social media. I'm real easy to find, Brandon. But you and I work together on a couple of things. So if you need me and you can't remember BillDippel.com, get the resource from 34 Strong. We love working with them. And then say, hey, that Bill Dippel guy was cool. I want to talk to him. Let me know how.
Yes, and he is. All right, friends. Well, thank you again. And we look forward to having you join us on the next episode of Coach to Coach.
Thank you for tuning in to the Strengths Whisperer Coach to Coach. Please feel free to reach out to Brandon to partner with 34 Strong for collaboration opportunities to serve your employees or clients together. If you are a strengths coach, lead a strengths-based team, or are a fan of strength, we invite you to receive our complimentary resource, How to Be a Good Teammate to Me, Understanding My Contributions and Needs. Email Brandon_Miller at 34strong.com to connect, and he will gladly share this resource that will continue to unlock the power of strength.